of the UN Ocean Conference that it was organized in June 2017 in New York. We have organized this day as an effort to see what is the progress in the last 16 months after the Oceans Conference in New York, and we are privileged to have to be joined in the opening panel with our distinguished speakers, which I introduce one by one. I want to thank all of you for being here, and with other founders saying, I want to start the opening ceremony. I would like to invite first the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, Ms. Armida Salsiak Ali Sakpana, to give us her opening welcome remarks on the role of regional platforms and cooperation for a healthy ocean. Armida, the floor is yours. Yes, please, in the podium.
Mr. Taholo Kami, Special Representative for the Ocean Pathway of the Fiji COP23 Presidency, Madam Asaheden, Counselor, Head for Regional Development Cooperation for the Embassy of Sweden in Thailand, Ambassador Peter Thompson, UN Special Envoy for the Ocean, Excellencies, very distinguished delegates, a very good morning to all of you, and welcome to the UN ESCAP. It is my pleasure to welcome you here for the Asia Pacific Day for the Ocean, a subject central to the future of our region with such a wealth of marine and coastal resources. I'm looking forward to hearing the outcome of your deliberations. But as a basis for discussion, let me briefly set out UN ESCAP's analysis and touch upon actions on which we may wish to build. We all know oceans make a huge contribution to our region. Fisheries provide livelihoods to over 200 million people. The Pacific Islands alone supply 1/3 of the world's tuna, generating $4 billion a year. 84% of the global population engaged in the fisheries and aquaculture sector is in Asia. The combined value of ocean-related activities in the Melanesian region comprises of Fiji, New Caledonia, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Vanuatu was estimated to be well over $5 billion US dollar a year. Indeed, marine and coastal tourism provides significant opportunities which could be further developed. A good example is the Coral Triangle between Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, Solomon Islands, and Timor-Leste. This is home to 60% of all known coral species and over 3,000 fish species. Nature-based tourism in these marine tropical waters has significant economic benefits. Yet, 3 years into the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, UN ESCAP analysis shows ocean health in Asia and the Pacific has deteriorated further. The unsustainable exploitation of marine resources has led to the disappearance of over 40% of coral reefs. 60% of coastal mangroves, which protect coastlines, have been lost. 80% of the region's coral reefs are at risk. Reversing these trends is imperative but challenging because the management of the marine environment is fragmented across different sectors and jurisdictions, and because we lack the data to establish a clear picture of the challenge. There is a clear case for strengthening ocean governance across national, regional, and global systems. As the convener of regional multi-stakeholder and intergovernmental platforms, at UN ESCAP, we are eager to work with all of you to support a more coherent effort to reduce the inherently transboundary challenge of marine pollution. The urgency to act was recognized at the UN Oceans Conference in 2017. More than 800, and I understand from Ambassador Thompson yesterday that it's growing, the commitment of voluntary commitments were made to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 14 in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. This represents more than half of global commitments. ESCAP is now working to achieve this ambition by strengthening ocean statistics and by providing a platform to coordinate and support new actions. This is important because SDG 14 lacks a unifying framework to comprehensively understand what actions are being taken for our marine environment. This means gaps in progress towards the various targets of SDG 14 are likely, and inconsistencies in approaches can lead to ineffective and inefficient SDG 14 implementation. The Asia-Pacific Day for the Ocean is an opportunity to consider how we can better align reporting frameworks. We want to improve coherence, coordination, and communication between actors, and strengthen the evidence base needed to support the aims of SDG 14. This ambition underpins ESCAP's commitment to facilitate ocean governance through an ocean accounts partnership of member states, expert institutions, and other interested parties. Through this partnership, we will support our member states assess and address capacity development needs for implementing SDG 14, harmonize and improve data access, and share experiences on SDG 14 to report and distribute knowledge. We have already begun the reviews of national ocean governance, gaps and good practices in pilot countries. In collaboration with UN Environment, or UNEP, we are working on a statistical framework and guidance manual for ocean accounts. This work will not only ensure our policies on oceans is evidence-based, but also identify where evidence needs to be strengthened. To implement our own voluntary commitment to facilitate evidence-based ocean governance, ESCAP is gathering evidence through several pilot projects. For example, our Ocean Cities project has demonstrated how nature-based solutions in coastal cities in Pacific Islands can increase community resilience, protect vital marine and coastal ecosystems, and be more cost-effective than engineering solutions. ESCAP's initiative called Closing the Loop aims to deepen our understanding of plastic waste value chains in cities and explore the contribution informal waste management can make to recycling. We are developing a methodology to accelerate actions to achieve SDG 14 and strengthen benefit across other goals. At ESCAP, we are keen to join forces with all ocean stakeholders to align efforts to achieve the 2030 agenda by promoting the sustainable use of our marine resources based on solid methodologies and empirical evidence. Without accelerated action to strengthen governance to restore the health of our ocean and seas, our region's societies, economies, and way of life will be irreversibly altered. So let us join forces, let us turn commitments into achievements, and strive for a healthy ocean that will help leave no one behind in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you very much for your kind attention and have a successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, for your opening remarks, for highlighting the importance of oceans for the region, but also for the very positive messages on what could be the benefits of preserving and managing more sustainable our oceans. And thank you for your prompt to walk the talk of sustainable development of oceans. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said in the introduction, this conference is this Day of the Oceans is a direct follow-up of the Oceans Conference in June 2017, that it was held under the auspices of the UN General Assembly at a time where Ambassador Peter Thompson was the President of the General Assembly and co-convener of this conference. So we are very pleased today to have him with us, and I would like now to invite him on the podium for an opening speech to set the scene on communities of ocean action and the role of the healthy ocean for sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific. Ambassador Thompson, the floor is yours.
There we go. So, great pleasure to be here with you today. I'm going to read you a poem because I know that you're all poets at heart. We all are, I guess. This is by Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet who got a Nobel Prize for his efforts. Good Pacific man. Spent a lot of time sitting on the foreshores of the Pacific down there in Chile. It's a great poem, actually. I'm only going to read you the first verse, but look it up. It's called The Sea, because the second and third verses are pretty good too. I need the sea because it teaches me. I don't know if I learn music or awareness, if it's a single wave or its vast existence, or only its harsh voice, or its shining suggestion of ships and fish. The fact is that until I fall asleep, in some magnetic way, I move in the university of the waves. And I think what first hit me when I read that poem was the idea of the university of the waves and being taught by it. And the reason it resonated with me was I realized that, I guess like a lot of you, we have learned so much from the ocean in our lives. For me, growing up in Fiji, you can swim pretty much as soon as you can walk. And as soon as you could get a mask on, to see the incredible colors and biodiversity of the reefs which surrounded our hometown of Suva was to understand the joy and wonder of being a human being on planet Earth. Just to have the privilege of living on this planet was such a joyful thing. We were also, and still are today, a mangrove coast. So in our little tin boats as boys, paddling around there again, it was the joy of nature, those tidal zones, with the mud skippers climbing up the mangrove roots and the birds filling the trees, just the joy of being alive. The ocean taught us all that. Today, the ocean is giving us a very different message. It's giving us a lecture in the fact that humanity is on a path to unsustainability, that if we can carry on the way we are at the moment with our consumption and production patterns and the way we're treating the ocean through what is happening in the atmosphere, that we won't have a place on this planet because we are heading in a sadly unsustainable direction. The envelope of the planet is being pushed too far, and every scientific projection, unfortunately, shows us that those trends are still trending badly. When we look at the ocean, we see ocean acidification, again, trending badly. We see ocean warming, again, recent scientific announcement, you would have seen that we've been underestimating the rate at which the ocean is warming. Deoxygenating, less oxygen in the ocean. And you can imagine what that means for life within the ocean. So all these things, we're starting to see their effect on our way of life by the fact that, as the Executive Secretary said, corals are dying, sea levels are rising, fish are migrating away from tropical areas because the water is too warm. We're seeing the effects. And only the apathetic or the ignorant, without saying that in a negative way, are turning away from these lessons that the ocean is giving us. Anyway, the good news, before you all walk out in depression from this room, the good news is that we have a plan to save the ocean. I'm a grandfather. I've just flown all the way from, I went all the way to New Zealand for the weekend to be with my granddaughters. And they know about the work that I do on oceans around the world, and they ask me how we're going. I can say hand on heart that we have a plan, we are putting the plan in place, and that by 2030, we will indeed have turned things around, that this decline in the health of the ocean will have turned around. They won't know the pristine ocean that I knew as a kid in Fiji. They won't know that. There's too much has changed now for us to get back to that. But we can give them a stable ocean with healthy life in it, and I am very confident, hand on heart, that if our plan is implemented, that will be the case in 2030. Not that far off now. And the plan, of course, is the Paris Climate Agreement and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, which all of us agreed to by consensus in 2015 after many years of arduous negotiation. So it's our implementation of that plan, the Paris Climate Agreement and the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, which will give us that better future to hand on to our grandchildren. In the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, as you're aware, is SDG 14, the ocean's goal. And I'd just like to say a little bit about what we're doing on that, because that's obviously my job as Special Envoy to ensure that we have the necessary momentum to have confidence that SDG 14 is proceeding on target. So as was referenced, well, let me just back the truck up to SDG 14 itself, because not everybody wanted an ocean goal in the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Let's remember how far we've come since those days of negotiating the 2015 agreement. In the years leading up to that, we faced very strong opposition to the idea of SDG 14. Strange to think back on that now when you think that there is so much ocean action around the world, but back then it was a different story. And I do give kudos to the Pacific Small Island Developing States ambassadors who led the charge on that, who built up a coalition of the other SIDS and other maritime nations to make sure that we got SDG 14 into the agenda. Once in the agenda, of course, the essential thing was that it was not just a nice pile of words. We had to make sure that it was being implemented. And that was the reason why, when I was president of the General Assembly, that I pulled together that ocean conference in June 2017. And I think it's fair to say that the inclusiveness of that conference, the energy that came out of that conference, the commitments that came out of it, the incredible call for action. I really refer you to that call for action document, because again, that was painstakingly put together by all 193 countries of the United Nations. Reference it, it's a great document. The call for action. All of that came out of the June 2017 conference was the game changer, and we see now around the world, and I'll reference a few of the things happening around the world, but I'm in 2 different countries every week, and everywhere I go now, the ocean action is on the lips of every government, of increasingly of corporations and of civil society. So from 2017, where do we go? We had from that list of things that came out of the conference, one of the things that came out was these 1,400 voluntary commitments made by governments and organizations. And when we, in the aftermath of the conference, we said, well, this is some proof of implementation. We have to make sure we have a system to help those that have made commitments and to assess how they're going in terms of their implementation. So this is where we put in place at the United Nations, administered by a DESA Secretariat, at the UN Secretariat, these communities of ocean action. 9 of them. A consultant was hired to analyze the 1,400 voluntary commitments, to group them, and we basically set up these 9 communities of ocean action, which are each of them led by a co-focal point of international stature. So people like heads of international governmental organizations, heads of NGOs, names which I'm sure you know every one of them. There are 18 of them heading up the 9 communities of ocean action. And the communities of ocean action would be obvious to you. They're one on fisheries, one on ocean governance, one on mangroves, one on coastal ecosystems, one on coral reefs, and so on. There's 9 of them. Have a look on the website, the UN website, oceanconference.un.org, and you'll get a full description of the organization of those communities of ocean action. I regularly take part in global webinars that DESA puts together and that these co-focal points put together. The message that we gave over a year ago when they started was build up slowly, because once we get to 2019, these communities of ocean action are going to be extremely important, and I'll explain why. In the approach to the first ocean conference, we had a similar arrangement. For the first time, actually, that it was done, we got into rooms, these what we then called informal preparatory working groups, based around similar subjects. You know, one on coastal ecosystems, one on fisheries, etc. And screaming and kicking, we brought the UN system into the room from the various departments, from the various agencies, from civil society. We brought them into the room and said, prepare now, we're going to have this game-changing ocean conference. And we did that for 1 year. And Sweden and Fiji, as co-presidents of the conference, we attended every one of those meetings, banged heads together, and eventually found that everybody got it. And so that system worked. So once we decided that we were going to carry on these voluntary commitments through this same sort of organization, that's when the communities of ocean action were formed. They've had a good year, 2018. For example, I was at the Ramsar Convention in Dubai a couple of weeks ago. We had the Community of Ocean Action on mangroves. There were about 150 people in the room, standing room only, co-chaired by the 2 focal points. And I'm confident that they are turning the corner on mangroves and will do by 2020. Now, why are the communities of ocean action so important? They are important because in 2020, it's very likely that we will have our second UN Ocean Conference. And I have to say very likely, because at the moment, member states in New York are working on the mandating resolution for that conference. I'm expecting that to be done early next year, that mandating resolution be passed. I spent a week in New York recently. Member states are very strongly in support, and the logic behind it is clear. 4 of the 10 targets of SDG 14 mature in 2020. So if we want to have integrity of implementation of the 2030 agenda, this is a very important way station. The 4 targets of SDG 14 maturing in 2020. And those targets are significant ones. You know, there's removal of harmful fisheries subsidies. It's a WTO job, but that comes up in 2020. 10% of the ocean to be covered by marine protected areas. You know, that's a job for all of us. Good news, we're trending well on that one. At the Ocean Conference in June last year, we were at 5.7. Current time, we're at 7.4 and heading in the right direction towards 10%. So I'm confident on that one. And that'll be discussed when when is it? Sunday this week. I'll be in Nairobi with all the co-focal points and Sherpas of the Communities of Ocean Action, and UNEP will actually be giving us a presentation on the MPAs and the projections for us to reach that 10%. The other two are, one is better management of coastal and marine ecosystems, and we'll be discussing that a lot here today. Again, I'm confident we'll be able to prove that when we get to the 2020 Ocean Conference, UN Ocean Conference. The fourth one is probably the hardest one, which is ending IUU fishing and ending overfishing. That's a bit like saying end crime, but I think we'll be able to show that we've made very good progress on that one in 2020. Kenya and Portugal have offered to co-host the second UN Ocean Conference in 2020 in Lisbon. And I would remind you that when you co-host, as Fiji and Sweden found, you meet all the costs of a UN conference. So it's a big undertaking, and I really congratulate Portugal. I see there's a representative here from Portugal, my colleague from New York days. And I also know that Kenya is doing incredible work with Portugal in preparing for that. So let me make a few shout-outs. One, I've mentioned Kenya. The Sustainable Blue Economy Conference, which is happening in Kenya next week, is an example of the huge wave of ocean action that is happening around the world that I was referring to earlier. Now, this was an idea that President Kenyatta and I discussed about 18 months ago. It's come from just a conversation, because what he said was Africa's had its back to the ocean always. We need to turn around and embrace the sustainable blue economy. So from that conversation, we now have a situation where next week, over 10,000 people have registered to attend this conference in Nairobi. 177 governments have registered to attend. I think there's something like 11 or 12 heads of government attending. This is the mood of engagement that the world has on the need to reverse that decline in the ocean, but also to engage with the ocean so that our economies can prosper from the ocean. Kenya will be all about the balance between protection and production that the ocean gives us. That's the sustainable development, blue economy. The balance between protection and production. Conservation and sustainable use of the ocean. That's what SDG 14 says. So big congratulations to Kenya on putting that all together, and I look forward to next week. The other one which I wanted to touch on, it's a shout out to FAO and the Port States Measures Agreement. Again, that's something that touches all of us. This is the best weapon we have against IUU fishing. And again, it was reached with after a lot of negotiation between all of us at the FAO in Rome. So at the moment, we are only about 60 governments have ratified the Port States Measures Agreement. Now, this is to stop illegal fish being put onto your wharves in your countries. Once you've signed this agreement, there are certain mechanisms in place that you have to put in practice to stop that happening. So at the moment, only about 60 countries. By the time we get to Lisbon, I'm determined that we need to have that number double, that we have at least over 100, hopefully 120 countries signed up by then. That's a clear indication that the world is saying no to IUU fishing. If you don't think IUU fishing is a problem, consider the fact that every year $23 billion of illegal fish is put on our plates. We've all been receivers of stolen goods in our fish and chips or our soups. And that is fish that is being stolen from many other countries in this room. It has to be put right. It's just a shocking thing that humanity still has this level of IUU fishing, because sadly, as many of you all know, IUU fishing gets coupled up with other illegal activities such as human trafficking, drug trafficking, and so on. The other shout out that I would like to do is to what's happening here in this region. This ESCAP program, the 4 projects, this is right on target. This is SDG 14 in action, and I really applaud you all for putting it together. The Ocean Accounts platform, we have to have that data to make the right decisions in the huge challenges that loom ahead for the ocean. We Ocean cities is the second of your projects. This is critical stuff. You know, the world is rapidly urbanizing, and the cities and rivers are the source of most of our marine pollution. So great work that can be done in cities to overcome these problems. Closing the loop on plastic waste, again, you're right on target here, especially with Asia producing, I think there's 5 countries that produce over half of the world's marine pollution. You know, so ESCAP has got work to do, and accelerating implementation of SDG 14. I don't need to speak on that. I'm sure you all get that. But in doing that, you know, as well as you've got the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, but in the Pacific Ocean, you know, I really highlight the fact that we have some great ocean-related institutions, and ESCAP should be, I'm sure, is working closely with them. I'm thinking of the SPC, of the SPREP, the FFA, PIF's OPOC office. These are really excellent regional organizations that cover the whole of the Pacific Ocean. So ESCAP, please work with them, support them, because they are doing the SDG 14 implementation in the world's biggest ocean. UNFCCC, I should touch on that. We're heading towards Poland in December, where Fiji hands over to Poland the COP presidency. We obviously doing our darndest to make sure that the ocean has a part in climate discussions, because it's just insane to us that it shouldn't. You know, our ocean is the driver of climate. When you come from Pacific Island, you can see that every day out on the lagoon. So we are pushing hard for there to be ocean-enhanced components of the nationally determined contributions under the UNFCCC process. We're also pushing hard for there to be meaningful ocean content in the Paris rulebook. But I'm sure Taholo will say a bit more about that as we proceed towards Katowice. I'd also like to shout out to PEMSI, who've got a very important meeting, a ministerial meeting happening in Philippines next week. I was supposed to be there. They haven't worked out how to clone me yet. I'm going to be in Nairobi at the economy conference, but great work, PEMSI, on what you are and have been doing and will do. You know, I'll conclude by saying that we need to get involved, all of us, individuals, governments, organizations, and we have a plan, as I said. I do believe there's a universal power that guides us all here on planet Earth, that it speaks to us through the ocean. As Neruda said, it teaches us through the sea. So, you know, we've heard the lesson, other than those that do not want to hear it for strange reasons. So we've heard the lesson, and we know what the plan is. And we as individuals, I've seen that throughout my career, individuals make a huge difference. We as individuals, in our families, in our communities, in our organizations, in our nations, have this responsibility, having heard the lesson, having learnt the plan, to implement it with integrity, and I'm sure you will all be a part of that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Thompson, for starting poetically and also closing with very practical advice. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2017 Ocean Conference was co-convened by Fiji and Sweden, and we have representatives of the two countries to let us know about the progress made since the 2017 UN Oceans Conference. I would like to invite first Mr. Taholo Kami, Special Representative of the Ocean Pathway of the Fiji COP23 presidency, to give his brief remarks.
I think I'll stay seated for this one. But Excellencies and our host, the Executive Secretary of UN ESCAP, the UN Special Envoy for the Ocean, and Fijian, another Fijian, Peter Thompson, and representatives, countries, organizations, and friends of the ocean. I just want to share a few thoughts and not get too much into the science. You'll be hearing a lot of that I love the direction going on, but just a little focus on the relationship of ocean and climate. But to give this a background, it's been a big year for Fiji in 2017 with the co-chair of the first UN Ocean Conference, as mentioned by Ambassador Thompson, and the co-chair with Sweden. We also took on the COP23 presidency. And again, our challenge was not only the discussions going into COP24 with the rule book. You've heard about the Talanoa dialogue, but another priority has been what do we do with the ocean in the UNFCCC process. And I've been responsible for the ocean pathway in terms of saying where do we go, what is the appropriate fit in the UNFCCC process. And we launched the ocean pathway again together with Sweden and continue to lead this process as we move forward into not just COP24, but it's a commitment to get it right by 2020. And we're seeing COP25 as most likely the best opportunity to get this done. We're already starting to call COP25 the Ocean COP, although the hosts are not quite into that at the moment. I'd like to focus a little bit on just 4 things, just to stir some thinking, coming from experience and perspective from our region. And these are related to ocean and climate. And as I said, I think you'll get more details on some of these issues. But one, it just raises the realities that we're facing as we're discussing, that we're seeing these changes happen, both climate change and ocean change, and the fact that these two are interrelated. It's becoming quite clear that if we're going to get the Paris Agreement, the targets of starting at 1.5 or even staying under 2, I'm sure everyone in this room is aware we can't do that without a relatively functioning and healthy ocean. And so getting SDG 14 is not essential only for the healthy ocean. It's important for climate change, absolutely essential for climate change and the planet as a whole. The first of the 4 things, ocean warming. I remember in 2016 coming back to my office and meeting staff who just come from holidays, and everybody was saying it's hot in the water. And I remember this distinctly because this kept coming over and over from people who'd just been spending holidays at the ocean. We were hitting 30 degrees then around the shores of Fiji, probably 35 upwards in the shallow water. And while we're discussing this, we had a small hurricane cyclone heading for Tonga, which is 200-300 kilometers south of Fiji. The cyclone starts to head to Tonga. It hits Tonga as a category 2. And then it turns around and does something we've never seen, at least in recent records. It turns around and starts heading back for Fiji. It's coming as a category 2, and over 200 kilometers it hits Fiji as Cyclone Winston as a category 5, over 200 kilometers. It's interesting, there's new words being used now. It's called rapid intensification. And we're seeing this repeated with the similar hurricanes and cyclones happening around the world today. And then the language that's going around these things, for many, it's the first time in living memory that we're seeing these regular things happen. And of course, we've had recently Cyclone Florence. So now when I see a cyclone, I quickly check Google and start looking for how warm is the water. And I checked with Cyclone Florence, it was 29 degrees and heading towards 30. And it was just a few miles short in terms of going from a category 4 to a category 5. And this is ocean warming above the water. Cyclones hit Hong Kong, the biggest system in the world this year, just went through the Pacific, this side of the Pacific, Marianas and Guam. And so again, these new realities are coming up with ocean warming. What scares me is that while we see the catastrophes above the water, we need to know more about what's happening under the water or in the water in terms of ocean warming and these massive ecosystems within our oceans. And it's a reality. It's something that we have to engage in and start to understand in a space that we know little enough as it is, or we should know a lot more. The second one is ocean acidification. And again, something that for many of us seems quite distant. So I'm raising this example because Ambassador Thompson and myself spoke at an Ocean Acidification Alliance meeting in San Francisco recently, started from the upper west coast of America, because they were starting to see problems with the formation of their oysters. It was starting to affect the oyster industry. Interesting enough, started by commercial and political interests, and it's become a reality, and they start the Ocean Acidification Alliance. The membership is growing. It's one of the positive outcomes of the UN Ocean Conference. And I want to raise just an example from Fiji. While everybody was talking whose oysters were best in the colder, temperate climates, I only just remembered that we have oysters too in Fiji, and but we have pearls in our oysters. And Fiji pearls, we have a person called Justin Hunter, and has started something called the Blue Pledge, which is part of our Ocean Pathway journey, where they're starting to recognize that they're on the front line as well in terms of ocean and climate change. There's no pearl industry if we don't get oceans right. And the Blue Pledge is starting to say, for those who are doing the right thing with the ocean, in terms of the luxury market, that there's a way to tag these things all the way through to the market. And the added value of good work and transparency and healthy ocean work at the ground level, and the product that people wear around their necks in terms of high value products, and starting to get the industry to start to do the right thing. And the Blue Pledge will be something that you'll be seeing more of. It's getting engagement through the luxury industry. There'll be a big presentation in Nairobi, and something else going through into COP24. But the good thing is, even this, it's an example of a very small business that's being affected, that has implications and ripple effects right through the luxury industry. Rising sea levels, another big issue that's difficult to address. We have countries in the Pacific, several countries where it's become an existential issue. And Marshall Islands, these low-lying islands, etc. The interesting thing is we talk about it, the only country in the world that's offered them a home on the very real possibility that in 50 to 100 years, they might have to move, not because their islands have disappeared, but because the conditions to live there become unlivable. And Fiji is the only country right now to offer them a home, but we're hoping over time, as we look beyond our 5-year political windows, that we start to see that we need a new engagement that starts to deal with the realities of not just migration on busy coastal zones, but also these existential issues of island countries. And another reality where climate change and oceans come together, and we're starting to see critical outcomes. The last one on this one is the action on climate change and the Ocean Pathway. We've started a Friends of the Ocean process in Bangkok here in September during the UNFCCC process that was held here. It was the first of that kind in the UNFCCC, very positive, because we had to have these debates, a safe space for countries to say what is the space of ocean in the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. And right now it's just one word, ocean, in the preamble of the Paris Agreement. And it has a reference to a certain couple of other passages as sinks. But we've got to start to say, is this a discussion that can be held in two different spaces? Or is there some middle ground that must be established where the UNFCCC starts to recognize each year that there's a space to understand where we're going with oceans? And that's the role of the Ocean Pathway. We've circulated a couple of papers to countries that are ocean friendly, that are aware of these things. I must warn countries to here around the table that we have to make big calls going into COP25, not so much COP24. COP24 is get the Paris rule book right and ocean friendly. We've circulated a document, I'm happy to get that circulated to this group as well, saying these are certain paragraphs you need to check out with your countries, parties. But going into next year, it's important, we'll have an IPCC report on oceans, the ocean and the cryosphere and the whole relationship with climate change. And B, we must be prepared to say, what do we need to do to ensure we're doing the right thing with the ocean as we deal with climate change. Finally, we've got 10 years to get it right, the emphasis for 2030. The IPCC report that's just come out on 1.5 has reinforced this. a healthy ocean is an essential part of the solution if we're going to deal with climate change. Asia Pacific, and I'm excited about this convening here today. We've got the most amazing marine biodiversity and a mix of both visionary leadership and at the same time some of the biggest abuses of the ocean in the same space that we all share. And I think it's, we've got the science, we know what to do, we need to get people on board at all levels. And we've got to do this at a scale that we've never done before. And we're in uncharted territories. In uncharted territory, we've got a roadmap that's been created at the UN level. The important thing is starting to ask ourselves from this part of the world and around the edge and the middle of the world's biggest ocean, and start to say, how do we get people on board at all levels, individuals, municipalities and cities, the corporates, the states, the countries, the regions. Let's talk action today and getting a global shift starting with initiatives starting in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kami, for making the links between climate change and oceans, both as part of the impact, but most importantly, as healthy oceans being part of the solution to the climate problem. I would like to invite now Ms. Asa Hedden, Councillor and Head for Regional Development Cooperation of the Embassy of Sweden in Thailand, for her brief remarks also on the progress after 2017.
Thank you. Executive Secretary of the UN ESCAP, Ambassador of the Ocean, and Special Representative for the Ocean Pathway of Fiji. Ladies and gentlemen, friends of the ocean, a very good morning to you. Someone told me that the ocean, if the ocean was a country, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world. I and Sweden are very happy that we co-hosted the Ocean Conference last year together with Fiji. And as has already been mentioned, the conference gathered thousands of participants and generated more than 1,000 voluntary commitments. Over 40% of these commitments came from this region. So it's great to be here today at this event, which proves the commitment to implement the promises made a year ago. To learn from each other, to continue to build partnerships and to raise ambitions. Sweden's national budget for 2018 is our largest budget ever for environment, ocean, climate-related actions. It includes a $70 million US increase on ocean for such things as project funding to decrease eutrophication, cleanup of hazardous shipwrecks, actions to reduce plastic and microplastics, and support to restore wetlands and reduce leakage of nutrients to the ocean. In this region, the plague of plastic pollution is very visible. Sweden is among the top countries in the world when it comes to recycling plastic. Around 85% of all plastic bottles are currently being recycled, but we are aiming to step up this effort to reach 95%. We have also drastically reduced our consumption of plastic bags, and just this year there's a new government policy requiring retail stores to inform customers of their environmental impact. So we have been able to drop the consumption to 50%, or more than 50%. We have also taken action to enhance the quality of our water by banning the use of microplastic in a range of cosmetic products. In this region, we have the Regional Development Cooperation Strategy, which we try to aim to contribute to sustainable development through mutual interaction between human rights, democracy, gender equality, environment, and climate change. We are happy to work together and find solutions. One example of this is the agreement with UNEP, UN Environment, and COBC to work on solutions to the plastic problems in the region. We're also supporting the program Mangroves for the Future, administrated by the IUCN, the region. And the program has been instrumental in enhancing the livelihoods and resilience of coastal communities and sustainable coastal management in many countries in this region. This year, the Swedish government also decided on a global strategy for international development cooperation on climate and environment. SDG 14 has a very prominent place in that strategy. And it's more than $700 million over 5 years. We also continue to be active in international partnerships to implement the SDG 14 targets. Since the UN conference last year in June, the Swedish Deputy Prime Minister is co-sharing with the UN Special Envoy, Peter Thomson. Thank you very much for your excellent and strong leadership. The intention is to mobilize innovative engagement and resources from the private sector, civil society, international organizations, and philanthropics for actions to deliver on the SDG 14 targets. And the initiative is the Friends of Ocean Action. Fiji and Sweden are also continuing our cooperation by co-sharing the Ocean Pathway Initiative to move forward on the ocean actions in the climate negotiation and action space. I also would like to give you some information about the Blue Action Fund. It is a fund that supports NGOs to conduct marine conservation projects in developing countries through enhancing management of existing MPAs, enlarging existing ones, or establishing new MPAs, supporting sustainable livelihoods in coastal communities dependent on MPAs and their buffer zones. This fund was launched by Germany and Sweden in 2017, and in this year France is also contributing. And the total volume on the fund is close to 50 million euro. Now there's an open call for proposals in Southeast Asia. Proposals can be submitted up until 14th of February 2019 for projects in Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam, and in some transboundary projects also for Malaysia and Thailand. Finally, I would like to thank you and ESCAP for organizing this important event. I think regional partners such as ESCAP and Communities of Ocean Action can help catalyze action for a healthy ocean while supporting implementation of the SDG 14 in this region, especially looking into 2020 when the next ocean conference will be held, but also of the targets for SDG 14s have a due date. Thank you very much for your attention and a very good conference and coming days. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hedden, and thank you for mentioning the streamlining of the ocean commitments into the budgets of national governments, which is a very important success factor, I think, for implementing commitments. We have also a video message in this opening session from Mr. Michael Lodge, which is the Secretary General of the International Seabed Authority, and he will briefly talk to us about the Community of Ocean Action on implementing of international law as reflected in the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. Can we see the video, please?
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I regret very much that I cannot be here today to celebrate the inaugural Asia-Pacific Ocean Day. This event presents a good opportunity to take stock of the progress on the voluntary commitments we made at the 2017 UN Ocean Conference and to share the lessons learned from our ongoing efforts. Since it came into existence 24 years ago, the International Seabed Authority has invested significant efforts to achieve sustainable use of marine minerals for the benefit of mankind as a whole. An essential part of our mission is to promote and encourage the conduct of marine scientific research in the international seabed area, and especially to facilitate effective participation by developing states in deep sea exploration and research programs. A striking illustration of our engagement is to be found in the fact that 4 out of the 7 voluntary commitments
Let's give a round of applause to Mr. Lodge. He might be able to listen our spirit in Jamaica. Ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up the opening ceremony and to present also ESCAP's voluntary commitment to strengthen ocean governance and statistical capacity in the region, I would like to invite Mr. Hongjo Ham, Deputy Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to give us its final remarks.
Thank you very much, Stefanos, and let me try to be as brief as possible. One of the voluntary commitments that ESCAP has agreed to is the development of an oceans account partnership. Data and statistics on oceans is quite available, but official data on oceans and statistics is extremely limited. In Asia and the Pacific regions, when we look at the SDGs, we see two areas of notable regression. That is, we are going backwards on the SDG. One is the issue of inequality. The other are the issues of all the environmental SDG areas, notably in 13 and of course 14. With inequality, the measure is precise. Gini coefficients, inequality of wealth, inequality of opportunity. But when it comes to environmental issues, and especially on SDG 14, our measures are very loose. In fact, the only single SDG indicator that we have data is on marine protected areas, which we are seeing improving. But all other measures, we're finding a lack of reliable official data. This isn't fake news, it's official data that we lack. The Oceans Partnership is really about gathering data and statistics. And as I said earlier, much of the data and statistics is available but not shared. The previous presenters gave quite a nice summary of the physical conditions of our oceans, temperature, acidity, etc. But there are two phenomena that are occurring that is basically an input, mankind putting stuff into the oceans, and mankind taking things out of the oceans. And on the input side, we see pollutions, pollutants, not just plastics, but chemicals, ballast, etc., etc. There are accurate measures of these, but they are very disparate and private. Most of the plastic and these pollution materials comes from the Asia-Pacific region. We have source data, we don't have the data that it transfers into the oceans. On the output side, we already heard very much about the fishing situation and the IUUs. Because they're illegal, unregistered, and undocumented, I can't say that they come from Asia Pacific, but I have a very strong suspicion that the majority of them do. So our region is responsible in many ways for the health of the oceans, and we happen to have the two biggest oceans that determine the ecosystem of our planet. What we need is accurate data. We need data that comes from the global level down, and we have incredible geospatial data now that tracks IUUs, that monitors the conditions of our oceans, that can even measure the levels of pollutants in our ocean, but the data is many times private and disparate. We also need to strengthen the national authorities and national governments, the National Statistics Office, in their ability to gather data on the oceans, both physical, what we put in, what we take out. And this requires a major coordinated effort. The data that exists, many of the most vital data actually exist with private sector firms. The key to our pollution problem, the key to overfishing, in many instances, lie with private sector firms. We are trying to work with the private sector to get their data, to create an open platform of data that can be used to advance the cause of the ocean's health. With this data, one of the most important aspects is additional research. The things I do not know about the oceans far outweigh the little that I do. And with the Asia Pacific Rim Universities, we hope that we can use the data to further specific research that can add to the policy and evidence-based decision-making process. That is, in essence, what the ESCAP Oceans Account Partnership is all about. I'll be happy to share any more additional documents with any of you. Would love to get your feedback as we move this particular project forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ham, for highlighting the importance of accurate, correct data available to all, and thank you very much for making everything possible to be so efficient with time. Really appreciate it. For the continuation, after having a short coffee break, we will reconvene in 2 parallel sessions, one on marine and coastal ecosystems management, coral reefs and mangroves in meeting room A, and a second on marine pollution and closing the loop on plastic waste in meeting room H. I would like, first of all, to ask all of you to a round of applause to our distinguished panel, and thank very much our Executive Secretary, the UN Special Envoy for the Ocean, and the representatives of Fiji and Sweden. I would also like to invite the 4 panelists to take a photo outside of the room, and after the first photo, all of the group to please join our distinguished panel for a photo session. Thank you very much.